Hello, good morning, everyone. Hi, we would like to welcome you to our first session, Starting Early, Empowering Your Child Through Self-Advocacy. My name is Lucelia Young, and I am a resource coordinator and librarian here at Adapt Community Network. Now, before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping notes for all of you. So if you have a question for our presenters today, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You're going to see the icon on your toolbar. Just click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, type in your question, and hit send. The chat box will only be used for sharing helpful links and information about Adapt Community Network and this specific webinar, including how to access translation, which you will find shortly posted in the chat. Now, we would like to remind you all to please keep your questions general in nature, since today's session is meant to share overall information and not address specific situations. And just a quick reminder, please don't include any sensitive or personal details in your questions, like your son's name, the school that they go to, anything like that, please. Now, we would like you all to know that if your connection drops for whatever reason during the session, do not worry. You can simply just rejoin using the same link provided in your invitation email. And we understand that technical difficulties always or might happen. So if you miss any content, kindly visit our website after the summit at www.adaptcommunitynetwork.org and be sure to follow us on social media at Adapt We Change. We truly appreciate your patience and continued participation. And now I would like to introduce our speakers for this first session. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the session featuring Dr. Mary McDonald, who we've had the pleasure of having here again, and Ms. Emma Bayordi. So Dr. Mary McDonald is a professor at Hofstra University, where she directs advanced certificate programs and a master's degree in applied behavior analysis. She serves as the Associate Executive Director for Long Island Programs at Eden II. She has over 30 years experience directing programs for students with ASD, utilizing the principles of ABA from early intervention through adulthood. She received her PhD in learning processes from the CUNY Graduate Center, and it's a board-certified behavior analyst, doctoral level, and a licensed behavior analyst. Dr. McDonald currently serves on an advisory board such as the QSAC, the QSAC, and Accelerations Educational Software. She also serves in the Generative AI Task Force at Hofstra University. Now, Emma Bayordi, our other speaker, is a New York State certified special education teacher currently working at the Eden II Genesis Outreach Autism Center in East Meadow, New York. She holds 4 professional certifications in teaching and has worked in special education settings across ages from preschool to adulthood. She also obtained her bachelor's degree in integrated early childhood education at Towson University in Maryland. She also has a master's degree in early child intervention and special education, as well as an advanced certificate in applied behavioral analysis from Hofstra University. Emma was a grant recipient at Hofstra University in the Hofstra Early Childhood Intervention Specialist, HECIS, grant program. And additionally, she has been providing behavioral intervention support, self-direction, and community rehabilitation in various communities for 10 years. Emma is passionate about working closely with families and practicing and teaching advocacy skills in the school and home setting. So enough of me. I'll hand it over to today's speakers. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having us. We're so excited to be here. This is such a great topic. When I approached Emma to do this topic, she said absolutely. She was on board in a second. So we're excited to talk about this topic here today.
Good
So,
morning, everyone.
so starting early, empowering your child through self-advocacy. So we are obviously going to be focusing on advocacy, specifically self-advocacy, and really thinking about how we can maybe start as early as possible. When Emma and I were talking about this topic, one of the things that we talked about was just how important advocacy is, and then how more even important self-advocacy is, and how often people don't think about it very often until children are maybe moving into their transition phase, their adolescent years, that sort of thing. And then people start to think about, oh, okay, I need to start to teach, what self-advocacy is. But we're going to talk about doing that a lot earlier this time. So, what does self-advocacy mean? These are some of the things we're going to think about today. Why early self-advocacy matters, learning some strategies to build self-advocacy at home and school, and discovering some tools and examples for practical application. So what is self-advocacy? We're talking about this topic today. It's so important, but really, what is it? So it's really being able to speak up for yourself. And we all have to be self-advocates. This is not just about people with disabilities, right? When you think about it, you may have gone to a doctor recently and the doctor immediately, look to prescribe a particular medication or tell you a particular treatment. And, you were able to maybe speak up for yourself, ask some more questions, ask, for what you need in that situation, even asking the doctor to write down what it is that they said so you could go home and, look it up and learn more about it, that sort of thing. So self-advocacy is really speaking for yourself, being able to ask for what you need, but also listening to others. As a self-advocate, you can't only speak, you do have to listen, and you have to speak respectfully to the other person so that you can really obviously build that relationship and hopefully get what you need, from the other person in the end. Finding and using resources, being able to nowadays go on the internet probably, but finding and using resources, right? And negotiating for yourself, finding ways to be able to negotiate. Sometimes self-advocacy is about negotiation. It's not always, just what you want and then you get that. Sometimes we're advocating for things, and we find a middle ground, and that's okay, and that makes sense. Kind of knowing your rights so that you know what you can advocate for, and your responsibilities depending on where it might be that you might be advocating, right? I know even within my job that I often have to advocate, for programs, for supports, for services, for funding, all these different kinds of things. So we're really all advocates in different ways, of course. Being able to explain, your disability either through written words, pictures, gestures, someone being able to tell someone, what they need. I'm thinking about one person in particular who, had gotten very good at using his IEP to be able to refer teachers back to that IEP to make sure that he was advocating for himself and he had it in writing and he knew that that was a very powerful tool for him, which was important. And then just really knowing that you even need help, right? For some individuals, they may not even realize, that they need help or that they need to ask for help, in that situation. So why an early start? I think that there is so much work to be done. And I think that these skills, they sort of build upon each other, So if we wait too long, then it's going to take a long time sometimes for people to learn these skills. And we know that for some of the students who we support, that sometimes skills can take years to really be learned and to be very independent and for the student to feel confident in them. So we feel that the earlier we can start, the better off we are. So that's important. It's also important for people of all ages to be able to advocate for themselves in whatever way, at whatever level, for whatever it might be that's important to them, at that time in their life, right? I think everything does take longer than we think. So it's always good to start early with everything. Not to be too overwhelmed today, but we always want to start early, right? And I think it also evolves over the lifespan. So when I'm very young, I might be advocating about things related to play and toys and, what I want to eat or what I don't want to eat and, some more basic kinds of things. And as I get older, I might be advocating about where I want to live or if I want to go to college or not, or, you know, um, just daily things like what do I want in my coffee? And why not? Why not start early? It's such an important ability. It's such an important skill. It's lifelong. It permeates all areas of our lives. And so why not teach our students and help support them as early as possible? I do think it will make a difference, in a child's life. I think being an advocate, being able to stand up for themselves and speak out and tell people what they need and refer people back to, their IEP or whatever it might be, I think can actually change, a child's life in a really positive way. And it takes time and it takes practice. So we want to start early so that we can start with those little smaller kinds of things that I'm not going to say they don't matter because they do matter, but they don't matter as much as some of the bigger things that might come a little bit later on. So why not give them the opportunity to learn those skills and hone those skills so that later on when they have those bigger things to tackle, they're much more confident in doing that. And something else that's interesting is that when you look at the research, it actually shows that academic, social, and vocational outcomes for students with intellectual disabilities and students with autism are superior for students with greater self-advocacy skills. So all the more reason, right? And it makes sense because they're able to, advocate for themselves through their academic life in social situations and in terms of, maybe their preferences and interests in terms of vocational. So it just makes a lot of sense, I think. Hopefully we've convinced you all that this is a good idea so far. That's to you.
So to all our audience members, all the adults, there are caregivers here, there are educators here. I'm sure there's people involved in students and children with disabilities lives in multiple capacities. Empowerment starts with us. We have a role in this. For children and students with disabilities, it can be common to interact with a variety of adults on a daily basis. We are their guides, their models, and their supporters. Through collaboration and communication, we can model self-advocacy together in the home setting, in the school setting, and form a partnership so that we can increase these skills across multiple settings. For caregivers, you can model self-advocacy at home, encourage decision-making, validate emotions of your children. For educators, you can provide structured choice-making, use classroom discussions for self-expression, embed advocacy into IEP goals. These are some things we're going to touch on today to give you some resources of how you can support your children to do self-advocacy in these settings. An example that I thought of when I was writing this was the school and home partnership and how important it is. As a teacher, I've noticed before that one of my students, when he goes to wash his hands, I kind of see a change in affect when he approaches the hand dryer. And in time, I saw him kind of covering his ears. And he usually enjoys his bathrooming routine and participates well. And then I started to notice that maybe loud sounds bothered him. In sharing this with his parent, she started to notice sometimes when he was acting out and there were loud sounds in the environment, like a lawnmower going off and a change in affect. We started to realize how we could support this child to tell us that it was too loud and give him choices for how he could still participate in his routines. Would you like to use the hand dryer or would you like to use a paper towel? This school and home partnership, or just a partnership in general for the adults in the lives of children with disabilities, can make a powerful impact for them for their self-advocacy. So how can we teach self-advocacy? Well, there are some key components that are involved in teaching self-advocacy, like knowing ourselves and knowing our kids, fostering self-awareness within them, using communication and teaching children to speak up, building problem-solving skills by taking a challenging situation and turning it into an opportunity. And using real-life, everyday examples by learning through experience. So as adults, we can help by building self-awareness so children can recognize their strengths, their challenges, and their emotions. We can help create safe spaces and safe opportunities for them to practice self-advocacy. And overall, we can promote independence by first speaking for the child, then speaking with the child, then increasing their skills so they can speak for themselves. We can use some strategies like modeling, using scripts and visuals. And these are some strategies that we're going to talk about today in depth. Self-awareness, the big question, who am I? What does self-awareness even mean? Well, it means that you understand your needs and you understand your strengths. And with that understanding, you could recognize maybe what challenges you and how certain feelings arise, so that you can likely recognize patterns and support yourself and learn more about your own preferences. By being self-aware, it allows you to make choices that are good for you. You know what you need, you know your triggers, and you know your preferences. Self-awareness is a really important skill, but it can be complex. But as we support children to be more self-aware, we can help them advocate for themselves.
And you mentioned a few times there, Emma, the word preference, and I think that preference takes a front seat when we think about advocacy,
Absolutely.
and especially early advocacy, right? And so what happens though is, we, especially in the beginning, we become the people, either the clinicians or the parents, we become the people who help to support the child to express whatever it is that they're trying to express, something that they want, something that they don't want, whatever it might be, something they would rather have in place of, in terms of making a choice. And, we need to know about that child's preferences in order to be able to do that. And for some of our students, they may be limited in their verbal ability to tell us those things, or they may not have any verbal ability at this point to be able to verbally tell us those things. And so what we do is we conduct preference assessments, and we can do actually formal preference assessments. And that's what I wanted to talk just for a few minutes about. This is a whole topic we could do a whole session on, but I'm just going to briefly touch upon it for today because I think it is important for people to think about. And if it's something that anyone would like more information about, you can certainly reach out to us and we're happy to share that. So there are some formal preference assessments. I'm not going to get too into all the different assessments, but there are some where you might be giving a child a choice between two items or between 10 different items and looking to see, how do they choose them? Or maybe even just presenting them with one item at a time and seeing how they react to it. So those are kind of the basic ideas of the ways that we might do some of these formal preference assessments. And we would actually take data during the assessment to see, what choices does the child seem to make. And the reason why this is important is because it helps us to understand, what are some of the more tangible items that this child might really enjoy? What activities, do they like? What kinds of technology are they drawn to? Do they have any particular food preferences or food dislikes, possibly, which is really just as important, a lot of times. And when we have that information and then they're in a situation, we're going to be better able to help to sort of prompt them, to help provide them, with the ability to let people know maybe what it is that they would like. I had a student one time, and he was a fan of lollipops, let's just say. Really liked lollipops. And one day he was doing, some project, working on something, and he had gotten this lollipop, and I want to say it was the red lollipop, and then he started to engage in behavior, and he threw himself on the floor, and he started to have all kinds of behavior, and everybody in the classroom was so confused, and they're like, I don't understand. Somebody just gave him a lollipop. Like, how could he be upset? Like, why would he be upset? And it ended up that he wanted a different color lollipop. And he didn't have any way to tell anyone. And so, in the beginning, it really can be something as, sort of simple as that, but important to him, important enough that he, had this behavioral episode, right? And so then we realized that. And then we taught him, and then we put on a token board or on the back of, some communication system. We made sure that he had opportunities to request different color lollipops, right? So that he could let us know what it was that he wanted. So yeah, preference I think is incredibly important, and we need to learn about it so that we can help to support it for sure.
I actually have a similar story about a lollipop. Um, they seem to be popular, but I had a student who the family expressed they had a very limited diet. Um, but we did try lollipops to actually work on some vocal approximations that we were working on to get him to open his mouth more and just get his mouth moving. One day, he just started requesting using his AAC device, saying pink, blue, and pointing at the corner. Pink, blue, pointing at the corner over and over again, very insistent. So we're trying to figure out what's going on, and we couldn't figure it out. We were using his device and facilitating communication between us, but we couldn't figure out what was going on. So we worked on calming strategies and redirected to other activities. Later in the day, we opened a drawer where there was a pink and blue lollipop, a swirly one. And we opened it, and you saw him say pink, blue, and point. And we had just opened the drawer because we were getting something else from the drawer. And we were so happy that he was telling us this preference and we had been using it on and off inconsistently, I mean. So it was wonderful that he used his communication to tell us the closest way possible. He didn't even have lollipop, I think, in his device. And then we, of course, added it.
Mhm.
But that motivation and getting to know him, if he likes a pink and blue lollipop, will he like a pink lollipop? Will he like a blue lollipop?
Right.
It told us so much about him and his motivation to communicate with us.
Yeah, for sure. I love it. I'm going to add the lollipop into the slide next time.
Yeah.
It's very important. But you have to remember that when you're talking about young children, like these things are the most important things to them. It's their toys, it's their, lollipop. Like these are the things that are really important. Other things might be important to us. I mean, maybe some people here today, the lollipop is still the most important thing. Good for you. But, we all have our things, right? So the other area that we might want to think about focusing on a bit are facial expressions and emotions. I find that this is obviously an area that can be difficult for some children to learn. But one of the issues that I see is that there are these products out there that you can purchase, like sets of cards, with facial expressions and emotions. And the difficulty is that when you look at some of those pictures, I think it's hard for us to know what they're supposed to be if we tried to label them. So, my recommendation when it comes to this is to really just start with like happy, sad, and mad. And if we could teach those three to our students and then kind of take them all the way through from just receptively identifying them, if possible, expressively identifying them, and then moving into eventually them being able to express when they're feeling that emotion or to be able to express an emotion related to a particular context, those more advanced kind of skills, but kind of taking it all the way through as opposed to a list of like 20 emotions where many of those cards, if I showed them to Emma right now, she wouldn't be able to tell me definitively what they are because they're hard to discriminate, right? So I just think it's a good place to start if we're kind of starting out. You can always add in more later. I think there are some like surprised, that one's okay. But then there are some that, are in that box and I hold them up and I show them to people and no one can tell me, consistently, what the actual answer is. And I just think it's kind of unfair to our students if we can't answer it, right? We can model facial expressions. We can have the student practice, making different facial expressions. I've done a nice program where I spoke to the family, talking about the partnership, Emma, and I asked them, tell me something that you think in your child's life, in real life, might make him actually feel sad. Like, tell me something that would make him feel sad or something that would make him feel happy. And so the parents told me Well, if he loves to go to Gino's Pizza, so if we went to Gino's and it was closed, he'd be
Hmm.
sad. And I said, okay, that's a good real life kind of thing. And so what the parents did was they got a picture of Gino's Pizza with the close sign. And then we had him matching pictures of his own face with different emotions to these different pictures, different scenarios. So he was able to learn like to match the sad face to Gino's closed. He was able to match the happy face of him in Gino's eating the pizza, things like that. So it was really connected to his life. So again, he could advocate and start to have some of that language.
That's incredible. I love that you guys did that. Because that was so proactive also for when you do go to Gino's and it's a holiday and you forgot
Exactly.
and they are closed. Or
Right. And then he can say, I feel sad, and that's okay,
that's
and get that
amazing.
emotion out, right? And tell us what it is that he's looking for. So the other area, again, for the young children that we think about is play, and that's another area that they probably either are or should be spending a lot of their time in, right? Because there's so much that you can learn through play in terms of language and social skills and just like interactions and just everything, turn taking, right? Just so many things. But another thing that comes up in play is this idea of, how you want to play or what you want to play. Or, it might be something that someone else is doing during your play that is upsetting to you. So you see the children building these structures and they look pretty happy and excited kind of about building these structures. But what would happen if the other child just knocked that structure down? And that kind of thing happens all the time in early childhood, right? All the time. And so you could see where this could lead to a student, obviously getting very upset and all of that. And I'm not saying that those things kind of almost shouldn't happen sometimes because we have to live in the real world and all of that. But rather than getting very upset, if they were able to use some way of expressing, what it is that they want or don't want during play, that would be really helpful. And then even just in terms of, asking someone to play or wanting to go play. So, we teach our students sometimes, to ask someone to play. And so they'll go over to someone and they'll say, like, do you want to play box? Now, what happens a lot of times, though, is people only teach that step. And so then the other child goes and plays box with them, and that's great. But we have to remember that sometimes the other child might actually advocate and they might say no, that they don't want to play blocks. So we have to teach the student that we're focusing on right now, we have to teach them to then either say to that student, in whatever way that is, it could be augmentative communication or verbal or, a visual or something, maybe ask them if they want to play something else so that they can still
Mhm.
play, right? So that's a possibility. Or our student could go to someone else and ask them if they want to play blocks. But there are choices, right? There are options. There are different ways that they might be able to get to what it is that they're trying to get to, right? And it's not always as simple as we might think it is by just teaching them to go ask someone to play, right? We have to kind of think it through and think about other people's advocacy too.
Yeah, play is such a great moment for self-advocacy skills in so many ways. And it makes me think of this great quote that I heard once, which is that play is the highest form of research. And some say Albert Einstein said that, but it has not been proven, so please don't quote me. But play, there's exploration, inquiry, imagination, but also everyone's got their agenda. Each three
Yeah,
girls in this photo may have their own play agenda ready to go. But it's a great moment for either collaboration or advocating for how you want
yeah.
to play or how you don't want to play.
Hmm.
So either way, if the tower is knocked down, it's a great moment for you to teach that child, hey, I don't like when you knock down my tower.
Right,
Please don't do it next time. Or
exactly.
maybe I want to build my own tower.
Right. And the other student may want to just knock down towers, and
Right.
that's their
And
advocacy.
that's
And so
their
they can build
agenda,
and knock them
their play
down
agenda.
for their own,
Right.
you know?
Wonderful.
This one's still me, Emma.
Yes.
Okay. So, for communication skills, of course, communication is going to be one of the largest areas that we're going to think about when it comes to self-advocacy. And we've really kind of been talking about it already throughout. But, the volley pop is a great example. So just teaching requesting, it's not always enough. for someone to just request something, we have to also look at, well, what is it that they like? It's not just a cookie, it's an Oreo cookie, and we have to actually teach, those finer discriminations between items. Making choices. Again, we know what they like. We have to figure out what they like. We have to make sure that we know so that we can help them in terms of making choices so that we're even offering some good things in the choices that we're offering to them, right? That we know that these are some things that they like. And then just even answering yes and no questions. It's amazing if you can teach a child to just answer yes and no questions, you can actually get so much information from that student without them having to really have all of the verbal ability to express all of that. You want them to, but in the meantime, while they're learning some of those skills, you really can just ask a lot of questions and really help them, throughout that. And then communicate what's working or not, and why, basically very similar to what we talked about before. And then we talked about the play. And we want to make sure that we always think about it as like honoring their voice, honoring their communication, because we're teaching children to communicate with us at whatever level that is and whatever way that it looks. But we have to make sure that when we do that, that we honor it. So I've seen sometimes where a child will, request something or deny something or whatever it might be. And the plan is that right now we're honoring it. Over time, we might have to add in things like they need to wait a little bit of time, or, they can have a choice of, or whatever the different things might be because of the setting or, just reality of the world. We can't just ask for things all day long and get them. Sometimes, life has to happen. But sometimes I see that the child makes those initiations and it's not honored, and it's supposed to be at that point. And so then the adult will say, either just sort of not respond or just kind of push it off a little bit, like, okay, we'll get back to that later, or we're busy right now. And then you see the child have behavior. And then everyone's confused, like, why is this child having behavior? Well, it's because you're not following the plan. And we set up a communication plan that we're supposed to be, following and reinforcing at this point. So we have to make sure that we go back to that. So I think it's always important. We want children to realize that their communication really is power and that they can affect things in their world through it. Otherwise, why do it, right?
Exactly. Just to reiterate what you just expressed is that we need to honor all forms of communication, and that self-advocacy is not about speaking verbally. It's about expressing your wants, your needs, your choices and feelings in a way that works for you. And always remembering that communication is diverse and communication looks different for everyone. We want to always allow for adequate processing time. It might be uncomfortable to allow for processing time as you're waiting for an answer to a question, but you may be surprised and learn something more about that individual the more time you wait, that they needed some extra time to answer you and they're ready with their answer when they're ready. Avoiding correcting communication styles, insisting on like a vocal approximation or a speech. If it's hard for the child, we're going to honor how they choose to communicate it, whether it's a visual, their AAC device, through sign or modified sign. Celebrating any efforts to express needs, even if it's a little unconventional, even if it's completely nonverbal and physical. A child, you hand them their lunch and they push it away, but gently, I'm not ready for my lunch. Okay, so this is that teaching moment. How can we show them other ways that they can say no, or I'm not ready, just to reinforce their choice, not to tell them that, they have to sit and eat their lunch. This helps a child feel safe to advocate for themselves without the fear of being dismissed. If we are trying to control how they communicate, then we can make them feel like the choice is not theirs and that there is no power behind their voice. So we just want to make sure that we remember these things about diverse communication and honoring each voice, even though some ways may be a little unconventional. If we encourage and model different communication ways, we're providing more ways for them to choose to communicate. So the more, the merrier.
I love that you included the processing time, Emma, because, I always makes you think about a student, right? But I remember this one student in particular who he really needed some processing time, but he needed like 10 to 15 seconds.
Mhm.
And because no one ever waits 10 to 15 seconds, no one knew that if they waited, that he would get the answer. And so, once somebody, finally realized that, then of course you could work on maybe trying to decrease, some of that time, increase his skills, increase his fluency, all great things to work on. But it was really difficult in the beginning because people thought that he didn't have any of the skills. And I had to tell them, no, no, just wait. If you just wait, you will see that he does actually have all the answers. You just have to give him the processing time. And I think it's so important to think about.
Right, and it may make us a little uncomfortable, and that's why we don't do it actively, right?
Yeah,
Why
people
aren't we
tend to
taking
jump
that
in. You
time?
want to support the student,
Right, we
right? We
want them to
give that
feel
prompt.
successful,
Right.
um, but just by remembering that, we can allow for them to be completely successful, just
Yeah.
without us jumping in.
Yep. And another thing that reminds me of also is sometimes just for ourselves, like not talking.
Yeah,
Like it's hard,
it's not easy.
and it's hard for parents, it's hard for teachers. But, I've gone to people's homes and the parent opens the door and the child's there, and immediately the parent tells them to say hello to me. And it's like, no, no, just give them a minute. Maybe they would have done that, right? So I think that that's also another sort of form of self-advocacy in a way, like just give them that time, to do it themselves.
Yeah, it's honoring what they need in that
Yeah.
moment, so the power of no. How many times have you heard an adult say, don't say no to me, right? Well, saying no is self-advocacy. It's not defiance. It doesn't have to be. It's a way of telling a preference and protesting appropriately, which is really important that all of our students and children know that they can protest appropriately. It's not always yes, it can be no. This helps them express their self-awareness and identify the boundaries, what's okay with them and what's not. Helps them build confidence and then start to deepen a deeper conversation because you said no. Well, now I have more questions to ask you. Whatever you said no to wasn't something that you wanted. Well, now I want to find out why and what do you want? It makes me think of when I actually worked in the preschool setting in an integrated special education classroom where I had 13 students and 6 students had IEPs and 7 students were typical peers from the community. And I worked there for 3 years. I absolutely loved that experience. And one thing I loved about it was that every year I would get a parent, at least one, if not a few, that would say, I just want to warn you, she or he or they is a little sassy. And I'd be like, we welcome the sass. It was my favorite thing to say to these parents. I wish I put it on a t-shirt and wore it the first day of school because these children modeled protesting for their peers. The more personality, the more sass for you to say no to me. Please say no to me. You're answering a question. You're still answering. So I think it's really important that we teach kids appropriate protesting. We'd obviously prefer it to be appropriate in the absence of a behavior, but still, if there is a behavior in them saying no, it's still a teachable moment so that the next time they want to say no, they do it appropriately.
And I just want to give the disclaimer, Emma, because I'm sure there's some people that are thinking like, but there might be things that they can't say no to, and we understand
Absolutely.
that too. And then sometimes in those situations, we might go more towards giving choices or
Yes,
letting them have some input. So let's say a child says no to brushing their teeth every day. Like we can't have them do that. But we can offer them maybe when they're going to brush their teeth, or we can give them choices of, different toothbrushes, different
absolutely.
toothpaste, different kinds of things. We can use a video model to maybe make it more fun, or a cartoon video model to make it more fun. There's things that we can do.
And it provides that next step. What happens after no, right? Well, you've said no now, so these are the choices that you can have safely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, back to me. So, in terms of communication and advocating, there's so many different ways that we can think of it in different language that it might be, but just a couple of sort of beginning things. And I think we've talked about a lot of these, but, I want, I don't want, I like, I don't like. We tend to teach the I want and the I like and my favorite kinds of language, but we don't often teach the other side of it. So, one of the things that I do is in reciprocal language. I'll teach a student, like I'll say something like, I see, and I'll look around the room, I see an elephant. Maybe there's, a picture of an elephant in the classroom or something. And then they'll look around and they'll say, I see whatever. And then I'll do, I don't see, and say something that's not, visible in the area, and then see if they can come up with that. So any way to try to get them to start to understand sort of the other side of things, and using this word, don't. I don't want. Having things out on the table and having them request certain things. Maybe you sort of touch it and start to push it towards them, and they say, I want, and then you take the thing that they don't want and you start to push that towards them, and then they learn to say, I don't want. But just getting them to start to practice that language, because they don't always learn it. We don't always teach it, right? And then another really big, I think, self-advocacy piece of language that comes up a lot for our students is that they work really hard. And so when they get breaks, they want to enjoy that time, right? And when they're taking a break, they may be like in a play area or whatever it is that they're doing, and they're really enjoying themselves. And the idea of coming back to work, because work is hard for them. They're working on skills that are not always, easy skills, right? They're learning to speak, they're learning to play, they're learning to engage, all these hard things. So they want to stay on the break longer. So what happens sometimes is when we call them back to, back to sort of session or back to work or back to their desk or whatever it is, to transition, sometimes they might have behavior in that time because they want to just stay and keep playing, with the toys in the way that they want to. And so we've had a lot of success just teaching children to say, can I have another minute, in any way, shape, or form? Again, it could be augmentative, it could be a pass, it could be whatever, but just some way to let people know they just want to stay a little bit longer. And that has made like tremendous difference for a lot of students. Sometimes you have kids that just want to keep giving you that pass minute after minute after minute then. And then eventually you do have to get them to transition back to whatever it is they're working on. But for a lot of students, just giving them the power to be able to say that and to be able to extend that break a little bit longer, and it costs us nothing, right? It's just another minute. It's not a big deal. But to them, it's really, really powerful. It makes a big difference. And then just even asking for a break, letting somebody know that they need a break is really important. And many of the things that we're thinking about here will also not only give them some power in their language, but also reduce the probability of certain behaviors occurring, which is always a good thing, right? I'm not finished. I had a student one time who was in the public school system, and he was being included into it was like an ICT type classroom, and he was there for not the whole day, but like half of the day, and he was there for lunch. And he went to lunch, and some kids came over to him and told him to throw his lunch in the garbage. And he went to go throw his lunch in the garbage. And thankfully, somebody saw it happening and came over and stopped it. And then we taught him, to not follow sort of inappropriate requests. But, he was a pretty compliant student. He listened to his teachers. And so when somebody told him to do this, he was going to do it. And then just even asking for help, just advocating for yourself and asking for help. Not all students can do that, right? And then they suffer and they struggle and they get frustrated, and all kinds of things can come from that if they're not able to do it.
So there are some resources, definitely, well, many resources to support communication for self-advocacy. And this was an interesting one that we had found from the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center, which is a research institute for autism spectrum disorders. And the QR code in the corner, which is also included in the handout that I passed along to adapt, will pull up the entire resource for you. It is pretty long and lengthy, so I'm just going to explain a piece of it here, but it is a 3-step self-advocacy process for caregivers. It's designed to be used by caregivers and breaks the problem into 3 parts. So the first part is scanning and naming what the problem is, identifying some solutions, and communicating together. So it provides a template script to facilitate problem solving between the caregiver and children at home together towards a common goal. So this example here is when mom is on the phone, which I know is a really common thing. Your parent is on the phone and you're waiting, and this child said, waiting for mom to stop talking on the phone when I have a question is hard for me because I don't know when she'll be free to talk again. And I don't want to forget my questions. So they first scanned and named the issue was that the child was waiting for mom on the phone and that child has a question. This is hard because I don't know when she'll be free and I don't want to forget my question. So how can we come up with a solution and communicate it? To help me be successful, I would like to write down my questions so I don't forget. I would also like a timer to visually see how much longer my mom will be on the phone. So this is a great moment for problem solving together at home, figuring out what works for you. And maybe there'd be different solutions, but you're teaching that child also a strategy for waiting. As well as an activity while waiting, right? Writing down the questions, or maybe there's other activities they can do while they're waiting, like playing a game or drawing a picture. And then you're teaching them a communication strategy by giving them a script of saying, this is hard for me. Waiting is hard for me and I need help, right? So this is a great moment for communication between the caregiver and their children at home and gives you a nice script of a starting place for different problems that may arise. Okay, so here we have an example of a different resource, which is social scripts. So social scripts help build understanding in situations that might otherwise feel overwhelming or confusing. They can be used proactively. They can be modeled in the moment, or you can use it after to revisit a situation. I mean, as a teacher, I will get phone calls or emails a lot, so-and-so came home and said Johnny took their magnet tiles, and you're hearing about it after the fact. So by using a social script, you can set clear expectations and outline a possible sequence of events that could proactively happen or one that had already happened, like Johnny taking toys from his friend. So you see here with the visual and the script, someone took something from me. What can I do? I can say, that's mine. Give it back, please. This is something that could be easily practiced at home with any items between siblings or between caregivers and their family members. This helps improve comprehension for students and also helps build confidence so that they enter the situation more prepared next time. It also is encouraging their independence so that they can speak for themselves and self-advocate when they need to. It allows them also to practice in a safe space if they felt confused or overwhelmed while it was happening in the moment. The QR code on the screen links to this resource. It is free from Teacher Pay Teachers, and it's from the Structured Autism Classroom if you'd like to check it out at your leisure. Speaking of resources, I went ahead and compiled some resources for self-advocacy specifically. In the first QR code that says resources, that is a link to Teachers Pay Teachers once again. It is a site that I frequent. It's a website that uses visual digital resources made by educators and therapists, people in the field of working with children. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are some resources here. So the first QR code links to all self-advocacy resources. If you were to type that word in, self-advocacy, right? If you type that term in, these are all the resources. And the second link is for everything that is free, which I know there's over 300 resources, which if it's free, it's for me, I like to say. So all you have to do is make a Teachers Pay Teachers account. It does not cost anything. You just need the account to be able to download the free resources. If you'd like to purchase resources, you would need an account as well. It shows all the different options that you can use. And I do have them pulled up, but for the sake of time, I'm going to carry on to our other resources.
So the next thing that we wanted to talk about is friendship. We're talking about young children. They're trying to, start to develop those friendships. They're, playing with other children. It's a really active time, in their life in that way, right? Where they're just, maybe going to school for the first time. Could be preschool, could be kindergarten. So there's a lot happening. There's sort of in some ways like a lot of pressure on them, to do all of these things, to do the right things, how they're engaging with other children and all. And so I'm not going to go through this slide, but I included it for you. This is just like little interviews of students at different ages and what they thought friendship was. And really, kind of the theme throughout is like someone that's nice to you is kind of like what comes to be. And when we think about our friends and our friendships, very often that is still the same. We want people who are nice to us, right? And someone maybe that we can, enjoy things with, and maybe we have some common interests. And so again, it goes back to preferences, and you have to know what you like to be able to, pair yourself with other people and think about, what it might mean to, spend time with somebody else and make some friends.
It reminds me of when on the first day of school, kids walk in and I feel like they all look at each other's like backpacks and water bottles and wait,
Right.
you like Spider-Man too?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And people with autism, especially if they're maybe a little bit older and they have some really good language abilities, they can very often describe qualities of what a friend should do, but they have very little understanding of what they should do, which is interesting, right? So again, just, teaching them a little bit about themselves, different social behaviors. What does it mean to be a friend? What are some of the things that maybe they should do? And then again, back to advocacy, them being able to advocate within a friendship. Just because you're friends with somebody doesn't mean that they get to always choose what to play. You have to take turns doing those kinds of things, right? There have to be ways that, you get to have things that you want, and sometimes they get to have things that they want. And then we go back to negotiations.
As well as conflicts are normal in friendships, right? Like especially as time goes on and your preferences might change, it's important
Mm-hmm.
that they can self-advocate
Yep.
themselves during a conflict.
And this is just, a little bit about why is it important to have friends. So I had a student one time that I was working with, and he was trying to sort of build some friendships, but he didn't really understand the value in having friends. And so we had to help him to sort of quantify that almost, to help him to see it, to understand like, to him, he was kind of like, well, why do I want to have friends? Like he thought he should because that's what people talk about, but he wasn't really sure why. And so we tried to help him with like this list here, just as an example of some things that, would be helpful for him if he had a friend, just to get him to kind of see that side of it a little bit. And one of the things that he really liked was learning about other people's cultures and, just kind of details. He likes a lot of details, holidays, calendars, dates, those kinds of things. And so he started to become friends with somebody who was from a different culture, and that was really exciting for him. This one still me?
Yes.
Okay, sometimes I can't tell. So for setting goals, the reason why we say this is because we're going to do this session here today and then the session will end. And so we want to think about, what are some goals that you might actually be thinking about? And, can you start to think about some of this early? And, can you think about what might actually even be an IEP goal that you might be able to set, or a goal that you might just work on at home? So some really important goals would be choice making, just making sure that children can actually make choices, because that is like a huge self-advocacy piece. And you don't really realize it, but people with disabilities often have a lot less choices provided to them throughout a day than people who don't have disabilities. Sometimes people are choosing their clothes, they're choosing their food, they're choosing their activities, they're choosing the order of their activities. Like there's just so much when you think about it that they don't always necessarily have choices. And so anything we can do for that. And then even ordering choices, like being able to, not always choose exactly what they want, but to at least sometimes put things in order of what they might like, right? So you're going to have to do brushing teeth and washing face and, doing all these things, but you can maybe choose a little bit of the order in which you do them. Requesting, we talked about, denying, negotiating, assertiveness. Flexibility is a whole other area, because if our students are not flexible, then they will only be advocating and will have a hard time sort of negotiating or hearing anybody else, in some situations. So we want to build that skill too. And that's a whole other presentation, flexibility, but important to think about.
So self-advocacy is a step towards self-determination. So self-determination is a term that we hear a lot now. And I did pull from an article a little definition of it. So self-determination refers to an individual's capacity and opportunities to act as a causal agent in their own lives, to make choices, decisions, and set goals. So by starting self-advocacy early, we plant the seeds for self-determination to grow over time, so that as our children transition from early childhood ages to school ages to young adulthood and beyond, they have those skills embedded. And as adults, we are able to help them become more involved in their IEP process and the goals that are written for them, but them, contributing to writing those goals. So speaking of such, as Dr. McDonald had already mentioned, I did link here a self-advocacy idea goal bank. It is free. It's also through Teachers Pay Teachers through the QR code there. And I did do a little screenshot of some choice making goals for self-advocacy. So you can take a minute and look at those. It can promote student engagement and participation in their progress. And the goal bank might just spark ideas, whether, you write a different goal or not, an interest in the student and the team. So by the student being more involved in their IEP process, they might be more motivated to make progress in those goals because they're more interested in them. The students, parents, and teachers can embed these goals into the IEP, and the buy-in is really high for the student because they've been involved in the process.
Yeah.
We have some more resources also related to the self-directed IEP, which is that students are leaders in their IEP process. And this is a resource from the National Assistance Center on transitioning. It's an info sheet about how to use the self-directed IEP, and it's based on evidence and research. I believe if I click on it and show it. Can you guys see this?
It won't carry over usually when you open like that. No, it's not showing it. But it's okay as long as we have the resource
Yes,
in
it's in
there.
there for the sake of time anyway.
Yeah, I know. I want us to get through the rest.
Yes,
We'll
but
scroll
it
through.
helps students understand their IEP and participate and lead in the meeting process. Here's more about the self-directed IEP as well. There's another link there. And this is actually based on a teacher from Colorado named Ashley Mabry, who created resources to teach students to be self-advocates in their IEP meetings through videos. And each video explains a part of the IEP process. It's great because the resource is visual, also auditory, and includes some modeling and allow for multiple means of support. So students can really have a high level of support in understanding what their IEP means and how they can be members of the IEP process.
Yeah, and I just want to say, Emma, that, obviously we're talking about starting early, and that's why we want to build all these skills so that as the students get older, that they can do things
Yes.
like this. I have
Yes.
a student who put together a really nice PowerPoint in middle school and presented basically at his IEP meeting and told everybody at the meeting exactly what he wanted to do and what his next steps were and what he thought his goals should be. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're bringing that up because I feel like parents need to hear that that option exists. If we don't hear about it, we don't know that that option exists. If we don't see
Right. I
the
think a lot of
images.
parents don't even know they can bring their child to the IEP. Right.
Exactly that, exactly. So
Mhm.
do
Yeah.
have a short video here. That's an example from the resources I just mentioned of a student introducing themselves at the IEP meeting.
Maybe just play like a few seconds.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, maybe not. May not carry through.
Okay.
No, it might be showing on your side, but not on this end.
Okay.
That's the trick sometimes. But that's okay. I can tell you what's on there.
Oh, I
So,
pulled it up.
oh, is it coming up? Okay. You're the best.
Okay.
Okay, what's your name? Andrew Biles. How old are you? 10. Yeah. Where do you live? Colorado Springs. Who are your friends?
Yeah, you could stop and I'll just explain.
Sure.
Patrick and
That's
Emma.
okay. I just want to keep our time. So basically the idea is, and this is just a YouTube
Ladies,
video.
sorry for the interruption. I
yeah.
just want to give you a heads up that we're going to start taking questions in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
And participants, I want to remind you all that you can use the Q&A feature on your toolbar to ask questions if you haven't done so yet. Thank you. Sorry for the
Thank you.
interruption.
No problem. So anyway, that was a video of a student practicing so that when he went into the actual IEP meeting, he would be more confident. So I just wanted to share that. I think we
Great.
should
So,
scroll through a little bit because we're going to run out of
yep,
time.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So there are QR codes, and I know you guys do have access to this. So we have embedded some more resources just to help if you are interested in having your child be more involved in their IEP process and at their meetings. And also included are some more video modules, really great resources here that model for students how to be involved, and also have students with disabilities speaking about how they have been involved and what tools they have used in their IEP process.
And then I just wanted to mention, I had gone to a conference a couple of years back, and some speech language pathologists at Ivy Mount had put together this program called This Is Me, and it's a self-advocacy tool, and it's really nice. And we actually were fortunate enough to write a grant and actually get some grant funding to implement this in our program, and they provided some training to our staff. And basically, I don't know, maybe, let me just see if you go to the next one, actually. Yeah. So this is one of the articles. There are a few articles that are written about This Is Me tool. And basically it's, having students create a This Is Me story about themselves. And it talks about, what they like and what they don't and what works for them and what types of prompts and how you might support them and how you might not support them and all kinds of things. And it's really nice to be able to use for new staff. It's really nice during transition periods if they're moving from like one school to another, or one, like if they're graduating from school and moving into an adult program or a new job site or anything like that. And the idea is that, not all of the students can verbally express all of these things, but their story can. And you can have them be absolutely like 100% involved in developing the story in all different ways. They may record it themselves, or they may, sort of script it in a sense, and somebody else might record it for them. But incredibly powerful idea.
So here we just have some challenges. Why don't we practice self-advocacy always? Why is it tough? So there are some barriers involved. Adults, we don't want to see our kids or our students to be unsuccessful. We want to protect them. We worry about if they have limited communication skills and we're not sure how to help them advocate for themselves. And we may feel like there's a lack of time or resources involved. Hopefully today we gave you some resources that you can refer to at least help that process. And some communication methods may be unconventional, so they may feel uncomfortable, but they do exist, and you can find something that works for you. And as adults, we empower our students to take safe risks and use different tools for communication and build support networks by doing so. If we don't allow them to take risks safely, then we're not allowing for opportunities of success. We tend to think about the failure or their fear of failure or the fear of them feeling like they haven't been successful. But that amazing feeling that comes from that moment of success, try to focus on that.
And I think it does take courage. You might not agree with somebody else. You might talk about something that's personal. You might be taking that risk that Emma's talking about. You might feel that people are going to judge you for standing up for yourself, or you might feel that there might be some sort of consequence, or you'll get in trouble, or you fear that it won't work out for you. So, and that's in our minds. Those are all the things that we're thinking of. And when you're little, you don't know how they might be processing that kind of information, right? But they might just think they'll be in trouble, um, you know, in that bigger sense. And we always believe
The
this,
ultimate
right?
goal. Yeah.
Yeah.
When children speak up for themselves, they learn to believe in themselves. You know, self-advocacy can help support a positive mindset and build confidence, which can increase their motivation to set goals, reach them, and also not be afraid to try new things or take, you know, risks or walk into novel environments. So we believe everyone deserves to feel confident about themselves and their abilities and what they bring to the table.
And that's it. We just have our takeaway slide, right?
Thank you so much, ladies, for this wonderful presentation. We are going to start our Q&A session right
Sure.
now. I do want to bring to your attention that the QR code wasn't working. So, and I believe that that was for the resources. If you don't mind sharing the links
No
in
problem.
the chat.
Yeah, I did test them this morning and I can send the direct links because I have them pulled up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Emma.
No problem.
We're gonna start with our first question now. Do you find that self-advocacy can be worked on with those who have a very hard time with receptive language? And for our audience that might not know what receptive language is that is the ability to understand and process spoken or written language.
I think that obviously, as we think about starting early, that very often we're thinking about students who really don't have, a lot of the skills that we're looking for, as we discussed, earlier. I think that for students who have difficulty specifically with receptive language, they might have more difficulty with, I'm assuming, because it's connected into receptive language, would be discriminations, being able to discriminate between things. So using some visual tools could be more challenging in that way. So sometimes we might just kind of change it up a bit. So I might do something like if I wanted them to be able to say like stop, I might put a stop sign on the desk and then they would just know that that's what that always means. They don't have to discriminate it from anything else. But then I might get like one of those buttons that you can record and put that, somewhere where they can press a button and that button might say something. This is assuming if they didn't have the verbal ability to do it. If they have the verbal ability, then I'm probably going to be able to just teach that, as more of an expressive skill. But if this is a student that doesn't have, either of those skills, then I would say that we would have to get a little creative. And not rely so much on, say, a PECS book where they might be discriminating between icons, which might be a challenge for them, but making it so that they have different ways to advocate, but that they're very clear and completely different initially while they continue to learn those skills.
Definitely. Now, how would you navigate your child communicating differently at school than at home? For example, this parent says that the teacher says that the student, it takes them a while to complete something, but at home they have no issue. This behavior doesn't happen.
So I have a thought about that one, and then Emma, I think you do too. But one of the things that we see a lot is we do see differences in our students between home and school, and that could be in terms of behavior, it can be skill acquisition, it could be demonstration of skills, across the board. And some of that is just because home is home and it's just different, and they're with their parents, and there's sort of like different expectations and things. But also, when you think about it, the way that you described it in that question, this is a student who's maybe engaging in a particular skill at home, but having trouble at school. And so sometimes we see the opposite of that, right? So if we were to see that, I would say that I would want to understand maybe more about that skill, how it's being done at home, maybe do a home visit or have a video or something to really understand better, what's happening at home. But also, we have to think about the variables. And sometimes at home, it's, more one-to-one, it's a quieter situation. There's like a lot of attention being given. In school, there may be a lot more noise and children and things that are happening that can be distracting, and it just makes the environment very different. So if I were learning math at home and math at school, it might be much harder for me, in a sense, even though that doesn't make sense because it's a classroom, right? So they should But the reality of a classroom is that sometimes there can be more distractions. So I'd want to look at all those different variables. Emma, what were you thinking?
I was thinking also like the expectations of home and school, I used to say to my little nephew, like, he'd be like, well, why do I have to go to school and you go to work and I miss you, Aunt Emma? And well, school is your work, like you go there to practice skills. And so the expectation at school is different, and the adults that you're with have different expectations than they would in your home. So I love that Dr. McDonald suggested a home visit for us to really go in and see what's going on. I have a student that at home, he has two younger siblings, and they're very rough and tumble, and that's how they communicate with each other. And the student's family member will always be like, he's throwing everything at home. He throws this and he throws that. And I always say, we never see throws here, but we see other behaviors here that are communicating something. And when I went to the child's home, I actually saw one of these throws, and they all were all laughing together. It was like actually a very funny family moment, and
Right.
I said, oh, he's probably throwing because this is some sort of, socialization for
Right. The
him with his
siblings were enjoying
family.
it.
This is normal at home, and he doesn't do it at school because it wouldn't be received in the same way. And when he goes home, it's pretty much a leisure environment, just like when I go home after work and I put my feet up and, and I turn on Netflix or whatever. So I think getting in the home, and as we had mentioned about that, like school and home partnership, if you're able to have that support system and you have adults who can come and observe in the home and help you navigate that, I think that would be best to figure out what's going on and how to support that individual.
Most definitely. Now, you both spoke about the power of no, and how that can, right, that can make a child be self-advocate, right, by saying no. But how can educators or caregivers strike a balance between offering support and allowing children to advocate for themselves, especially when the child maybe doesn't accept no as an answer to something that they want?
Okay, so sort of the other side of it, where the teacher is saying no and the child doesn't want to accept the no. Okay. So we actually do a program for that. For our students, we usually teach them waiting skills first, because waiting kind of comes before no, because with waiting, you're still going to get it. You just have to wait for it. We're not actually saying no yet. And then once they're able to sort of tolerate some level of waiting, then we introduce no. And so we will tell them that we'll request something and we'll tell them no. We don't start with their most preferred things because we want to stack the deck in a positive way. So we'll start with like a medium kind of item, right, that they want. We'll say no, but we'll only say no maybe like 1 out of 10 times initially. And then we'll kind of back that up till they can sort of handle that a little bit more. And then we'll teach them some language or response around that also, where maybe they could ask for something else. That negotiating kind of starts to come in a little bit. Or maybe they can ask, could I have it tomorrow? Or, those kinds of things. So that it's never, especially for the little ones, that it's never just no, because it's really hard for little ones to kind of accept that. But if we can push it down on the calendar, or we can say, we can revisit that later, they're usually a lot more amenable to that. Um, I think that what happens a lot of times is adults, use the word no. They think that they mean no, but then they don't follow through. And so children have learned that when you say no, it really means maybe. And if I bother you enough, it'll mean yes. So I think there's that too.
Most definitely. Now, I think we have time for only one last question. And what are some tips that you have for parents that want to collaborate with the professionals that work in their child's lives, like the teachers, the paraprofessionals, right? Their one-to-ones, and making sure that they're cultivating the self-advocacy in their children, when the parent is not there to enforce it or be in the know?
That's you, Emma.
So I think that, talking about self-advocacy, that parent needs to advocate for what they want as a parent. These are regardless of the IEP, these are my goals for my child. You know, these are things that are important to me. And also about honoring forms of communication. Maybe that parent works late nights, or if they're not available, you know, to be with their child when they get home from school. Who is there? How can we connect with the people that are there? How can we provide them with resources? And how does that parent want to stay in touch? Do you want to email? You know, like appropriately, how can we communicate if, you know, what works for you best? I've actually had parents who have been extremely active in communicating with me without even being on a phone call or me seeing them in person. And just that back and forth communication over an email or, you know, an app or whatever, has provided so much support for their child. So when they are with their child, they know what's going on and what kind of resources they can use to support them, even if it's just like a phrase. You know, hi, we just wanted to update you. We found something that really is working. Your child is taking deep breaths, and we're finding when we show them the number 3, we're counting deep breaths with them to get through that strategy. Just by sending that message to that parent, you're connecting them to what their child is doing in school, so that at the next moment that they are with their child, or if they are able to communicate with the caregivers that are available to be with that child, just so you know, here's a heads up, we're using the number 3 to take deep breaths now. That's like a huge door to open up, that child being able to have their parent involved, even if the parent can't be there.
Yeah, and for the parent to just start the conversation as Emma started with, just say, I think self-advocacy is important. How can we work on that? And then see, what the professional has to share and see how you can get some goals on the IEP and follow up on those and, ask for some updates as to how that's going and that sort of thing.
Most definitely. So I do want to thank you both for this presentation. I wanted to ask if it's possible to share your contact details once again for questions that maybe weren't answered. If you can pull that up on the screen for our
Absolutely.
participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And participants, as Emma, I believe, is pulling up the contact details, we do want to thank Dr. McDonald and Ms. Biordi for doing this presentation. And we want to remind you all that after the summit is completed, you'll receive an email with a survey link, and you can take a moment to complete it. And you'll be entered for a chance to win an Amazon gift card. So we'll leave the info up for a few more seconds, and then we'll transition into our next presentation. Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you.
McDonald. Thank you so much, Ms.
Thank you.
Priority.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.